real key to winning back power. The politics of immigration remain essentially unchanged. Republicans are aggressive and confident, always sure that whatever gets their base afraid and angry is good for them, while Democrats are tentative and uncertain, always afraid of what might anger people who probably aren't going to vote for them anyway. This is why some immigration advocates are trying to convince Democrats they need to go on offense on the immigration issue. Hey, this person is speaking my language. That's the message of some new polling from a coalition of immigration groups surveying voters in battleground states, which finds that even though immigration policies favored by Democrats are overwhelmingly popular, President Biden's approval on immigration is pretty poor. Just 36% approve of his performance on the issue, while 57% disapprove. And why would we expect voters to think Biden is doing a great job on the issue? Ask yourself. What has the average American heard when it comes to Biden and immigration? The administration has a blueprint for immigration policy and has even written a piece of reform legislation, but hasn't done much to communicate them to the public. If 1 in 100 people could accurately tell you what Biden wants to do, it would be a shock. Meanwhile, the news has been filled with stories about a crisis at the border. To a typical observer, it looks like Biden isn't really handling things well and doesn't have any ideas about what to do next. In fact, Biden is seeking a broad reversal of the Trump administration's policies, which were all focused on restricting legal immigration so that it would be as difficult and time-consuming as possible for anyone to come to the United States. Biden would streamline the system to increase the number of immigrants coming through a variety of pathways and provide a path to citizenship for undocumented immigrants, especially dreamers, those brought to the United States as children, and improving conditions and administrative processes for those who arrive at the border. On a conference call with reporters, the immigration advocates and pollsters argued that a path to citizenship is the entry point for Democrats to seize control of the debate, because it's supported by around 70% of voters. There's no strong opposition left to citizenship for dreamers, said Todd Schulte of Forward.us or Forward.us. The problem is getting from some ideas that people broadly support to actual policy change, which can be significantly more complicated, especially if it requires legislation in a closely divided Congress where the filibuster is intact. In the past, Congress has repeated a disheartening pattern. People in both parties say they support comprehensive immigration reform, incorporating both beefed-up border security to make Republicans happy and a path to citizenship for the undocumented to make Democrats happy. Well-meaning legislators work out a bill that they believe can garner bipartisan support. Then the whole effort collapses when a sufficient support from Republicans in one or both houses never materializes. From where the GOP sits, it's the only rational thing to do. Even if most Americans would like to see reform, within the Republican Party there's no reward for voting for it. Instead, you'll just get hammered from the right for selling out. It was true a decade ago, and it's particularly true now, when the xenophobic ex-president is still the party's leader and the most popular conservative media figure is a dog-whistling white nationalist. The outlook for reform would get only partly better if Republicans focused on swing voters instead of their base. The GOP will get no credit if immigration reform passes. Political scientist and pollster Gary Segura pointed out on the conference call, but Republicans will only get part of the blame if it fails. So as far as they're concerned, the status quo, no movement on legislation, plus the occasional crisis at the border they can blame on Democrats, is not a bad deal. Nevertheless, Segura argued, the unadorned viciousness of the Trump policies has hurt them. I do think they've paid a price in the suburbs. There are white female suburban voters who do not care for the politics of meanness, and that's an area of increasing strength for Democrats. Don't forget that in 2018, Trump tried to make the election all about supposedly threatening caravans from Central America, and Democrats won a sweeping victory. Yet that didn't seem to change Republicans' approach to the issue. So if there's going to be reform legislation, advocates hope it can be included in a budget reconciliation bill, which only requires a majority in both houses and would include hundreds of other things Democrats support. There's finally a chance to get it done without relying on Republicans, said Frank Sherry, the executive director of the advocacy group America's Voice. We have a path to victory that does not rely on one Republican vote. Despite the president's eternal desire for bipartisanship, there's nothing wrong with that. What matters most is getting the policy right, and if they want to stage some border photo ops, that's fine, as long as they don't let Republicans' attacks dictate their decisions. Okay, fair enough. I can't argue with much of that. Okay, here's something else. Why, this is kind of related to the last one. Why and how the politics of immigration have shifted over the past 6 months. Vice President Harris traveled Friday to the border, where she spoke with Border Patrol agents and toured a facility near El Paso. In the broader political conversation, if not in conservative media, the visit amounted to something of a blip. While earlier this year a dramatic increase in the number of migrants apprehended at the border spurred a flurry of questions for and criticism of the Biden administration, that focus has faded somewhat, reducing the temperature surrounding Harris's visit. Exploring how the immigration crisis faded and where it didn't provides a lot of insight into how immigration has worked under Biden and the extent to which he has benefited from a much-debated policy implemented by his predecessor. Oh, really? What could that be? There is no question that the number of apprehensions at the border was higher at the beginning of this year than in years past. Data with Customs and Border Protection shows that detention activity at the border with Mexico clearly increased after January. That data also shows, though, that the increase began last spring, shortly after the government closed the borders in response to the coronavirus pandemic. Even so, the increase has been dramatic. What spurred the crisis earlier this year wasn't just an increase in traffic at the border. The crisis instead derived from the number of children who were arriving at the border either with adults or by themselves. In fact, the number of unaccompanied minors arriving at the border was higher in March than at any other point on record. There are two reasons that was a particular problem. The federal government is mandated to treat detained children differently than adults. Under a legal settlement reached in 1997, child migrants detained by the United States can only be kept in typical prison-like detention facilities for a short period of time. The government has to move quickly toward releasing them to family members and, in the interim, must provide health care and educational assessments, among other things. In other words, caring for minors is much more resource-intensive. The government can't simply hold them in detention centers indefinitely, so if the government isn't prepared for an influx of minors, the system can quickly be overwhelmed. By early April, the government had gotten more of a handle on dealing with the increase in child migrants, a group that includes not only the unaccompanied minors, but also those arriving with their parents. The number of child migrants in the custody of the Border Patrol in what should only be short-term facilities dropped over the course of that month, as the below graph from the American Immigration Council makes clear. And you can't see it, but I will affirm that that is exactly what it says. By early May, the government has also started to reduce the number of children being accommodated by the Department of Health and Human Services Office of Refugee Resettlements, the agency responsible for longer-term care. The other reason the surge in minors and families was a problem was that the Biden administration had shifted away from quickly expelling members of those groups in line with Title 42 of U.S. Code Section 265. You'll be forgiven for not immediately being familiar with that particular legal guideline. In short, at the beginning of the pandemic, the Trump administration began using Title 42 as a justification to turn away people seeking entry to the United States on public health grounds. The result was that, from March through December of 2020, 83% of those denied entry or apprehended at the border were returned to Mexico. Under Biden, that has declined to 66%, still more than half. The number of children or family units, as the government's term has it, expelled to Mexico has declined from 61 to 26%, meaning far more children are remaining in the country. In recent weeks, though, the administration has faced calls to reduce that percentage even further. The majority of those stopped at the border are returned to Mexico, including 85% of individual adults. Doing so, of course, reduces strain on government resources. White House Chief of Staff Ron Klain, pointing to that American Immigration Council report, further touted the fact that many of those who are stopped at the border are actually people making another attempt after having been expelled. The extent to which the fact that fewer new people are seeking entry to the United States counts as some sort of victory would seem to be subjective. One way we can measure how the political crisis for the administration has faded is to look at how often the border is being mentioned on cable news. In March, a bit under 2% of all 15-second segments that aired on CNN or MSNBC in a given day included a mention of the border. On Fox News and Fox Business, the averages were 8% and 5%, respectively. By May, CNN and MSNBC were mentioning the border in fewer than 1 in 200 segments on average. The Fox networks were a bit above 2%. You'll notice that there was an increase in mentions of the border on both Fox News and Fox Business this month. That's mostly because of an increase in mentions of the border in the context of the vice president. After Biden announced that Harris would lead the administration's immigration efforts, conservative media began focusing on the fact that she had yet to actually visit the border. That criticism increased this month until the White House announced her visit earlier this week. During her visit to the border, Harris insisted that her visit was not a new plan, but one would be forgiven for assuming that the administration is very aware that her doing so cuts off another bit of oxygen or criticism from its opponents. Well, that's interesting, I guess. I thought they were going to talk a little bit about the critical race theory thing that was mentioned in the article earlier, because that indeed has become the what will we call it, the crisis du jour for the Republican Party. That's the new thing that they're all up in arms about. And and so the border is kind of forgotten to be really worried about that, I guess, because that crisis is not as much of a crisis as teaching people the true history of racism in the United States. But hey, who wants to know the truth when you can have feel-good stories about George Washington and a cherry tree, right? I mean, apparently that's what they want. Anyway, so I thought this was kind of interesting. It's neither here nor there, but it was something just sort of to be aware of. This is from the Department of Justice, U.S. Attorney's Office, Southern District of Texas. For immediate release, imposter sent to prison after claiming to be a federal immigration officer. A 53-year-old Laredan has been ordered to federal prison after he admitted to wire fraud and extortion under color of official right, announced acting U.S. Attorney Jennifer B. Lowry. Rito Solomon Palacios pleaded guilty September 9, 2020. Today, U.S. District Judge Diana Saldana ordered Palacios to serve a 57-month sentence to be immediately followed by 3 years of supervised release. At the hearing, the court heard additional information, including testimony and evidence detailing the fraud scheme and the emotional and physical damage Palacios caused the victim. 4 of them appeared in court and detailed the harassment and threats Palacios committed and the resultant ill effect on their lives. In handing down the sentence, Judge Saldana noted how heartless Palacio was in relation to his victims, as well as his history of thefts and lies and the unfortunate lack of real punishment in previous cases. The court upwardly departed and raised his criminal history category by 2 levels to adequately reflect his criminal history. Judge Saldana also mentioned his threats and aggression and considered Palacios a threat to the community. Palacios masqueraded at varying times as an officer or employee of Customs and Border Protection, an immigration officer or other federal officer or employee. At the time of his plea, the court also heard he delivered receipts in documents bearing the seal of the Department of Transportation and Customs and Border Protection. Palacios defrauded and extorted members of the public who were not citizens or nationals of the United States. He took money or property by false and fraudulent pretenses, representations, and promises to deliver immigration visas, permits, or residency in the United States. As part of the scheme, he utilized the Internet to set appointments for his victims to be fingerprinted. Palacios admitted as part of the plea that he demanded and obtained more than $72,000 from the fraud and extortion scheme. He was permitted to remain on bond and voluntarily surrender to the U.S. Bureau of Prisons facility to be determined in the near future. Immigration and Customs Enforcement Office of Professional Responsibility and Homeland Security Investigations conducted the investigation with the assistance of the Laredo Police Department. Assistant U.S. Attorney Jose Angel Moreno prosecuted the case. So yeah, there's some bad actors out there that are ready to prey on people, and that's one way that our screwed up system and the huge number of undocumented immigrants sets people up for abuse, because these people are generally they exist kind of outside the law in a very real sense, in terms of being able to get help, or to feel that they can get help when they need it, to feel that they can get answers when they need them, to feel that they have a right to stand up for themselves. And there's a lot of people, and it doesn't take that much, but there are plenty of them who are ready and willing to take advantage of this situation and take advantage of these people who are in this vulnerable position. And it's all because we don't just resolve the legality situation and give people a path to citizenship. And I'm sorry, I know, I can hear it right now. Somewhere, somebody is listening to this going, no, it's not. It's the fault of these guys for coming here without, the due process and following the rules and blah, 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 blah. What can I say? I mean, it is the reason people don't come, don't follow the rules, don't play by the game as it is designed currently, is because it's so messed up. It is so completely messed up. Okay, for example, I'll just read this one real quick. I was going to do something else first, but just as an example of how messed up our situation is, our system is. This is entitled, Immigration Court System Staggers Amidst Looming Backlog of Asylum Cases. The immigration court system is heavily backlogged with 1.3 million asylum cases. With the historic increase in the influx of immigrants entering the United States, immigration judges fear the system will experience a further slowdown. Customs and Border Protection reported that agents encountered more than 180,000 migrants at the southern border in May alone, the largest number in the last 2 decades. Syracuse University has estimated that an average wait for a hearing date before the immigration court is 1,642 days, or 54 months. Currently, in the immigration courts throughout the United States are about 500 immigration judges. These are the first-level judges who decide on asylum cases. cancellation of removal cases for both lawful permanent residents and undocumented immigrants, and immigrants who are facing removal proceedings. When President Biden took office, the estimated backlog of immigration cases pending a hearing was at 1.3 million, with the number of immigrants entering the United States only adding to that number. In its budget, the administration has allotted funds for the appointment of 100 new immigration judges. Immigration judges are appointed for life by the Attorney General and are employees of the Department of Justice. Immigration judges have often complained for the need for more judges to be appointed to ensure speedy adjudication. They have also expressed the need for more support staff. Immigration judges have been represented by a union, the National Association of Immigration Judges, since 1979. Former Attorney General William Barr petitioned to decertify the union. Then the Federal Labor Relations Authority overturned years of precedent by ruling that immigration judges are management officials and must not be a part of any collective bargaining unit. The association is opposing the ruling and waiting for the Federal Labor Relations Authority to rule on their motion to reconsider. Many congressional Democrats have urged Attorney General Merrick Garland and Deputy Attorney General Lisa Monaco to rescind Barr's petition. Attorney General Garland asserted that immigration judges should be left alone to do their work. He further expressed that he had not considered the issue regarding structuring the immigration system differently. A Justice Department spokesperson said that Garland has not yet decided on the issue of decertification of the National Association of Immigration Judges. Sorry, my voice starts getting bad as I talk for a long time. So there's an example. Why don't people just get in line, as you say? Well, the line is like about 20 miles long. And just getting in line doesn't mean you're ever going to get anywhere. You may not get to the front of the line ever because the line is sometimes not moving and sometimes is moving off who knows where. So, yeah, there are people here, and I aver that it is mainly the fault of our immigration system. You may say it is the fault of the people that chose to come here or somehow were put in the position of deciding to stay against the advice of the law of the land, or however you want to put it. And, I can't argue with you entirely because, yeah, they did make that choice. Except for the kids that are brought here by parents and have no say in the matter. Adults are making the choice to stay here. But the forces that are pushing them to make that choice are, in many cases, overwhelming. And I think many, many, many more of us would make that same choice for ourselves if we were in a similar position. It's easy to sit back in the comfort of and security of being a citizen, having a job, being, a functioning part of your society, and having your basic needs met. It's easy to judge other people, but it's a very different thing when you're in different circumstances. And there are a lot of people who are in terrible shape, and they're doing what they can for themselves and their families, and I applaud them for that. That takes courage. It takes even more courage to do it in the face of the kind of resistance you meet in this country against by a large segment of this country against people who come here and sort of work around our immigration system because they can't go through it successfully. They're not allowed to, or they're not able to, or they don't have that kind of time. So that's me. That's where I'm coming from. Okay, I'm going to quickly read something. I'm running out of time here. This is from Reuters. It's called The Week Ahead in Immigration, June 28th, 2021. Monday, June 28th at 1 p.m., the National Partnership for New Americans New York Immigration Coalition and the Coalition for Humane Immigrant Rights will present a 3-hour training on screening clients for eligibility in the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program. The program will cover the benefits and risks of DACA, eligibility requirements, and case studies. That's a bunch of groups. Okay, 1 p.m. I don't know where this is at, but maybe it's online. Anyway, go to Reuters legal litigation. Oh, just look up immigration. Reuters immigration. Week ahead in immigration, June 28th, if you want more details. Tuesday, June 29th, 2 p.m. A 9th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals panel will consider whether individuals remain eligible for deportation even after their state criminal records are expunged. Araceli Marina Larena, a Mexican national, says the Board of Immigration Appeals was wrong to find that her expunged conviction for conspiring to transport a controlled substance still counted as a conviction under the Immigration and Nationality Act. She is backed by amicus briefs from a coalition of advocacy groups and immigration law professors. The case is Mari Larena versus Garland, 9th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals, number 14-72003. Wednesday, June 20th, 2 p.m. The Catholic Legal Immigration Network will present a 90-minute webinar on how to effectively object in immigration court. Assistant U.S. Attorney Veronica Finkelstein in Philadelphia will discuss objection techniques, the rules of evidence in immigration court, and common pitfalls that can lead to objections. Thursday, July 1st, 1:30 p.m. A federal judge in San Francisco will hold a hearing on the government's motion for summary judgment in the American Civil Liberties Union's lawsuit seeking records related to federal agencies' use of social media to search for and monitor immigrants who are in the U.S. illegally. The Department of Homeland Security and State Department say they have already handed over all of the requested documents covered by the Freedom of Information Act. That's the case is American Civil Liberties Union Foundation et al. Versus Department of Justice. Okay. Well, that didn't take as long as I thought, but I'm pretty much out of time. So I appreciate your joining us. I know that my doing this show tends to be kind of sporadic at times. I'm pretty consistent about getting the UPTV and YouTube, because it goes on YouTube, getting those shows up. But the radio show is a little harder because it's an hour long, and I just, honestly, I have a hard time finding an hour where I can sit down and do this and record it, and then I have to edit the whole thing and put it together and then put it out. So a lot of times my radio show will tend to be every other week. But my UPTV is every week. It's only a half an hour. And the YouTube videos, they go up there a half an hour as well. And so that's how that stuff works. It's easier to do. So anyway, I appreciate you joining us. I hope that you'll join us again. We have stuff in the works, as we always do, and I'll let you know what that is if and when the time comes. In the meantime, just stay tuned here, or like I said, go to UPTV or YouTube and search for CU Immigration, and you'll find us, and you can check out what we're up to and what we're doing and all that stuff. In the meantime, we'll see you later. Bye-bye.